We are tonight's entertainment.
You can't handle the truth.
The fire rises.
Pizza time.
You're a wizard, Harry.
So it begins.
You know how much I sacrifice?
You think that's air you're breathing?
Groovy.
I don't have friends. I got family.
We are sex people! 1, 2, 3, 4!
Craft Services.
Hello, listener. We're in for a Trentless opening. He's off working on a, quote, nature show for Nat Geo about rats. That's National Geographic for the uninitiated. So you're just going to have to listen to what only I had to eat most recently. Well, as frequent listeners of the show may know, I have a very close friend, Sophia Alexis, and my father also frequently, or semi-frequently, a few times in the year, likes to make pizza in his pizza oven. And so he has been talking about inviting my close friend Sophia's family over to make them pizzas because, he'll make it for our neighbors or family friends or our other family. And Sophia's dad especially will be like, "Oh, when we get some of this, huh?" And it's sort of been this long-running thing of who's going to call first and be like, I want the pizza or I want to make the pizza for you. But it finally happened today, April 12th. And so my dad made a margarita pizza. He also made spinach and goat cheese pizza, as well as pizza with peppers and onions, as well as garlic bread in his pizza oven. And in fact, while we made the garlic bread, my dad realized that, well, first of all, he usually likes to cook it with coal, but unfortunately it was raining outside, so he needed to use gas. Or propane rather. But he realized quickly that we did not actually have enough propane once he started. And so after Sophia's parents came over, Sophia and I went over to Home Depot. It was a whole thing to switch out the propane tank because they'd moved where it used to be when I'd done it before. But long story short, we switched out the tank. Everything was fine. The pizza was really good. And my dad had also baked 2 pecan pies, and I bought some vanilla ice cream. So we went a la mode with that shit. And let's just say my belly is quite full. But the listener, you, are probably full of hearing from me. You kind of just want to hear the intro. So why don't I just cue it? Welcome back to Craft Services, where we talk about the movies. Each week we talk about a film and hopefully have a crew member of that film to talk with us about their experience working on the picture. This week, we have production designer Philip Messina on to talk about his experience working on Steven Soderbergh's Black Bag. Black Bag, a movie I really like. I think right now it's my favorite movie of the year, and if it's still playing in theaters near you, you should go check it out because it's pretty freaking good. I'm kind of a Soderbergh guy, and Philip Messina, that is too. He's been a production designer on his movies since Out of Sight. So Philip Messina's sort of been in it for the long haul with Mr. Soderbergh. We get into some really good stuff. We talk about how he started out as an art director and how that began his relationship with Soderbergh, how he moved up to production designer, how Soderbergh makes a bunch of movies with him and then a bunch of movies without him because he's just a freaking workhorse. And I don't want to hold you, the listener, off from it for much longer. So here it is, Philip Messina, Part 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our interview with Philip Messina. He's a production designer behind such films as the Ocean's Trilogy, 8 Mile, the Hunger Games Quadrilogy, and our film for today, Steven Soderbergh's Black Bag. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, guys.
So just to start off, can you talk about when you first wanted to become a production designer?
Wow. Well, when I was growing up, way back in the Stone Age, people didn't really know how films were made. I grew up in Massachusetts, and we never thought about. We loved movies, but different from friends of mine who grew up in Hollywood, who had friends in the business and family in the business, generational. I never thought about who the people were that made films, so I never even considered it as a career path. I kind of fell into it, like most stories you'll hear. I just kind of fell into it, happenstance. Met somebody who thought, you'd be great in the film business, and I just started from there. Even as when I started, I'd worked with kind of some pretty well-known production designers, a guy named Stuart Wurtzel, a woman named Ida Random. Those were kind of two of the first people I worked with in Massachusetts. Janine Opalwall, all pretty well-established production designers. And I never even at that point thought I could do what they did. It's only when I started working, a little bit more and started getting more experience, and I thought, oh, okay, maybe I can do this. And then there was a movie that I actually kind of like designed a little bit more than, as the art director, I kind of was a little bit more involved in the design. And I thought, okay, there was like, it's now just a short step. So it really kind of evolved that way. But it always came from a love of film and design. And if I had known that this was a career path when I was younger, I probably would have pursued it earlier.
And you started off, as you said, like as an art director, and I believe your collaborations with Steven Soderbergh began with Out of Sight as an art director?
Yeah, I actually began running blueprints with like the ammonia blueprints you'd run 40 blueprints and you'd like be wanting to pass out at the end of it, and you'd have like all ammonia stains on your hair. It was probably completely toxic, but I actually started off like right at the bottom, entry level. And yeah, I was the art director on Out of Sight, and Steven offered me his next film, Aaron Brockovich, maybe two films, I'm not sure. And I had already designed a pilot, this thing called Freaks and Geeks, which is a very niche. Some people get it, some people don't, and it's like, yeah, I love that show. That was with Jake Kasdan way back in the day. Yeah, so I did, my first 2 years as a designer, I was lucky enough to do Aaron Brockovich, Traffic, and then Ocean's 11. So
That's a killer trilogy.
I could say that because it was really through the door opened and I walked through it, basically. But that was sort of Steven's, one of his many sweet spots along the way. And that definitely was a sweet spot when he was giving his Oscar acceptance speech for Best Director. I believe it was for Traffic. We were prepping Ocean's 11. We were all in Vegas. They had a big party for us. We watched it out at the Bellagio. They set up a TV, and because it was mostly the same crew that had gone in that time period, it really was like rolling from one to the other, like kind of good sized studio movie on. So yeah, that was a heyday. We were like a big family back then. It was cool. It was very cool.
So you moved up the Soderbergh ladder internally pretty quickly, and he makes like 2 movies a year, which is convenient. And now you've designed like maybe 8 or 10 of his movies. Can you just talk a little bit about what the pre-production process between the two of you looks like?
Sure. I've actually done, I believe it's either 13 or 14 films with him, believe it or not. And he actually makes, for every one I do, he does maybe like 1 or 2 small ones in between. I just went to the Black Bag premiere, I think it was 3 weeks ago in New York, and he had just wrapped a film that he had shot in like 14 days or something. Before the premiere of this film even was out, he had already wrapped another film. So the guy is absolutely incredible. I don't know anybody else like him who's able to do that. But I always say that I was fortunate enough to learn the craft of production design as Steven was learning the craft of cinematography. Because out of sight, we had a proper cinematographer. We had a dedicated cinematographer. Aaron Brockovich, Ed Lockman was the cinematographer, but Steven operated. So that was his, Ed. I always remember how kind Ed was in like he lit and he kind of like really mentored Steven on that film. And, look, Steven, he's immensely talented, so he didn't need much, but he just needed that one film where like Ed was involved. Steven operated the whole time, and it was a very like gritty looking film. He wanted very, he was one of those guys that like he wanted to turn a studio film into a documentary. Like he wanted it to look like an indie film. So that was what he was going for with that, and that kind of fit sort of where he was at the time. And then Ocean's 11, he was like, got it on the cinematographer, director, and he's also edited a lot of his own films himself. So he's clever with all the pseudonyms. So you don't quite,
Peter Andrews.
Yeah, he's sort of like Marianne Bernard and that kind of stuff. Yeah, so I kind of, I was lucky enough. I always credit a gaffer that I worked with, a guy named Jim Planette. If you look him up, he's been involved in like amazing films. He's retired now, but he was the gaffer on a lot of those films, and he really, I feel like he was my mentor for designing lighting and sets and being cognizant of what the cinematographer's needs would be. So he was kind of my mentor in that sense. So it was kind of like I wouldn't say making it up as we went along, but there was kind of a looseness to it that kind of all fit with our personalities, and we never just got too serious about it. It was a fun time. And before I knew it, I was like, oh, I've designed 3 movies and 4 movies in 3 years or something. So my discography kind of grew pretty quickly, pretty fast.
So to get into the movie of the day, we're talking about Black Bag. Can you talk about when you knew first of this project and how you got involved and what that pre-production process for you looked like?
Sure. So we were going to do another film in London that it never happened, and I'm not going to talk about the details of it, but it was going to be pretty amazing. And for one reason or another, that never came together. And I had been sort of prepping it off the books and getting, I was doing my research and getting ready to go. Stephen was moving to London, and he's now physically kind of fully transitioned to London residence at this point. So he's moving from New York to London. He said, I want to make my next film in London. It's going to be this. And I'm like, great. I'm all in. I was super excited about it. And then it kind of fell apart. And I think like a week later, he came back and said, okay, now we're going to do Black Bag. It was set in, it was actually, believe it or not, and I still find this hard to kind of fathom, it was set in the U.S. and it was going to be U.S. spies. And he and David Koepp literally did like this kind of rewrite, this overlay, and they turned it into a London, a British spy film, which if you've seen it, it's sort of like, it doesn't feel like it could be anything but that.
No, it feels classically a British spy movie. Yeah.
Right. It's like, so, but that's the amazing thing about Soderbergh. He makes these big moves, and it's like a big, scary move for someone else is like, oh, we're going to pivot, and it's going to be this now. And so one of the initial things we talked about is he wanted to be kind of like a glossy, star-driven film. Kind of, I don't want to say a throwback, but kind of like the kind of movie we all wish we could still make more of and go see more of in the theater. And that was his, like, this is like our love letter to the British spy genre. So that kind of set me on my way through scouting and the set design and working with Ellen Mirajnik, who's like an amazing costume designer. She and I have done a couple films together. We collaborated very closely on colors and textures and tone. And Stephen, he's a very kind of unique character in that he will give his creative people a lot of runway. And when he wants something specific, he'll let you know. But otherwise, he's, and I think it comes with, it's not just happenstance. It comes with like years of experience and relationship. But I kind of know at this point kind of what will appeal to him, or I know 90% of what will appeal to him. And so I'm able to kind of go a certain distance. And then when he comes into the process, kind of laying out options for him with scouting, with sets, and I'll get some notes, but it's kind of like, we all just kind of go. It's kind of like the opposite of say, like a Wes Anderson prep, or, you know what I mean? I always say that like Steven's more of like a jazz performer. Like he wants to get in the space, get in the moment, and create. He doesn't, I think, an over amount of prep and overwroughtness on his part, he is not interested in. I think he wants the energy of just kind of getting on stage and playing jazz, So we all try to provide that for him, that context.
How would you describe like your approach to your design of Black Bag if you had like an angle on it?
Yeah, so generally it's I remember one of the first conversations that Ellen Mirajnik had with Cate Blanchett. Like we always knew it was going to be sexy because it was sort of like written into the script there's a certain sex appeal behind this couple. And I remember Ellen came back one time. I think I was in London already. She was still in New York or LA. And she said, Kate said to me she wanted her home and her clothing to be sensual. And that's kind of very different than sexy. And that kind of just allows you to kind of go a little deeper into it than like sexy can be maybe surface, but sensual kind of has a deeper connotations to it. And I really thought about that in the design and the tones, the colors and the textures. I was always thinking kind of as a foundation, kind of sensual. Now there was a lot of other ideas that went into the design of the film, but that kind of is the one I kept coming back to. As far as like the design of the house, I've done a couple of podcasts, and people are really interested about the house, which I think is super cool. I knew I wanted the exterior of the house to be stylish but anonymous, and I knew I wanted it to kind of blend into the neighborhood, and that's kind of to me the anonymity of the facade of a spy. It's like you notice them and then you instantly forget about them, like the minute they kind of blend. So I wanted a Georgian home, and we looked for a little bit for a Georgian home on a street that was Georgian homes on both sides, and it was actually kind of amazing because it was just it was a lot harder than you'd think to find a street that fit the bill, but we found a street. And I wanted, as you move through the house and through the set, I wanted it to go from sort of what you think is going to be behind those doors to sort of something a little bit different. And that started with the dining room. And as the architecture got a little bit more modern and contemporary, and as you move to the back of the house and the kitchen, it sort of almost has no historical resemblance to what the front of the house is all about. And that was, to me, like the duality of the spy life. And that's just, look, all designers, we make up stories to kind of hinge our ideas on. And sometimes you'll come up with it retroactively. This actually was one that I kind of like was thinking about from the beginning. And I knew I wanted when I first read the script, there was about 28 pages of a dining room scene, which I'd never seen before. And it sort of was like jarring enough that I knew I had to start the design there. So I really started the design from the dining room out. And I knew, dining scenes are tricky because the actors generally aren't moving. They're stationary. You don't have any kind of blocking or position changes, or, it's like they're seated and they're not moving. So talking to Steven, I knew the camera was going to do all the heavy lifting there to kind of make it cinematic. And so when I started with the dining room, and we were just, in the initial conversations, we were just going to build the dining room and find the rest of the house as the location. But as I started designing it, I opened up one whole space to the kitchen. I opened up one whole space to the living room. I sort of backed into designing the first floor of the house, and everybody was kind of excited enough with the design. They went with it, and it was early enough in the process. It wasn't like a last minute thing. So I had this kind of like this glass box that housed that kind of beautiful acacia tree. There was views back into the kitchen. And then beyond that, there's a backyard that we built. This is all on stage as well. Behind George, kind of where he's seated for both of those scenes, I kind of had this pastoral mural that we created, and then two other views that opened up back into the living room, and then one onto the staircase. So I really kind of went out from the center, out on both axes, and wanted to give him places to drop back to put the camera. When the camera was at the table, you could either shoot into a wall, into a part of a wall, or full depth. I really, it was kind of like a little bit of a Tetris puzzle. It was fun to design, but I really started there, knowing that, that first dining scene, you're either in or you're out. And I knew the dialogue was amazing, the actors were amazing. I just felt like I had to do my part for it to kind of contribute to that.
What an interview, huh, guys? If you were a fan of Philip Messina's talkings and ramblings, as I was, and Trent was, and he would agree if he wasn't filming a nature show for National Geographic about rats. If you were interested in what we were talking about, there's a part 2, and it's coming out next week on Sunday. So all of you black bag heads can go check that out. Yeah, Trent, if you listened to our episode last week, Trent saw Black Bag one time, not even for the purposes of this interview and fell asleep, not because of the quality of the movie, but just because Trent falls asleep during movies, and then watched it again for the purposes of this interview and thought he saw the whole thing. And then when we were talking about it, I was mentioning certain, like, or there's a key explosion in the movie, and he was like, I don't know what you're talking about. And we sort of quickly realized that he fell asleep again, but somehow didn't know that he had. So, you know, the way his mind works is a mystery to me, but it's a mystery I've spent 5 years on this podcast trying to solve. But if you like solving this mystery alongside me, you can always check us out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Pandora, etc. Wherever you get your podcasts, we're pretty much fucking there. And if you want to be updated on when we're uploading, you can go check us out on Instagram and Twitter. We're always posting over there. And please, please rate us 5 stars. Go tell your friends. Go tell your mom. Go tell your dad, your brother, your sister, anybody, really. We are desperate for listeners, and we would really appreciate it. So yeah, next week, Black Bag Part 2. I can't wait.